This portfolio is a visualization and a narrative that tells the story of my critical reflection through the means of writing. Through all the design studios, writings were used as inspiration, evidence of thinking process, and also an illustration of the outcomes. The writings were divided into 4 types of books based on different styles: an encyclopedia, a poetry, an autobiography, and the fiction, but then got mixed to work as one as a generator of my self-reflection throughout the design practice. The portfolio will talk about questioning as a design process as one of the key tools where history and theory come into support. It will also illustrate how writings evidence my thinking in terms of unfolding design process. Then the portfolio will discuss the relationship between drawings and writings when writings would not work effectively by itself, as another layer of self-reflection. The architectural ideas that start to merge through all the design studio practice will be demonstrated at last. Layers of papers on the book would evidence the depth of my thinking and continuous reflection. Questioning as a design process was used a lot and started in the studio Necropolis Now Part 2 and had been used widely in all the studios later on. Questioning effectively triggers thinking. It is a limitation with possibilities, a way to focus and dig deep. Questions started with what were used to define or redefine. Why questions are used to seek the significance or meaning of the design. Who questions are for user-specific projects, and questioning how is to seek the method to achieve that significance within its definition. Each of these questions will go through the process of asking a question, answering the question, then questioning the answer, which would add a layer of critical thinking. Precedents like films, readings, architects, news, issues, and personal experience were used to both generate and answer questions. For example, in the design of a symmetry, precedents like the Brayon symmetry were used to study the successful answer generated by famous architects for their specific questions. To the questioning of what a boundary is, the Brayon symmetry answered with the accessibility through different areas, corresponding with an architecture gesture of using slight height differences and walls. Questions related to technology were raised, such as how the site affects the technology in the design of the symmetry. Limited space in the Melbourne urban context made the growth of the disease a problem. It could be solved by having its storage at the existing condition of retaining walls, while it is questioned again by another proposal of how the symmetry should not be static but as if to mimic the cycle of life, transforming as a continuous building over the period of time. Thinking process like this happens throughout the studio and also could be evidenced in the design outcome. For example, the question of how is architecture language designed to provide certain experience is answered by having memorial space beside the compressed walkway showing the transition of space. Then the answer is questioned again by, do people need to come to the site to mourn? In a more artistic and subjective way, the project of a leaking container or an imperfect fit was developed through the questions inspired by films and readings, and evolved by writing as critical thinking. In the understanding of the film Death in Venice, I saw a man with problems of self-isolation and avoidance, accused by his angry friend, and also the crazy obsession towards a beautiful boy. It leads to the thinking of the cause of the problem. The answer of exaggeration is illustrated by the architecture gestures like a huge sphere blocking the communication between its lower and higher level and uneven wavy bathroom tiles. Then the question was raised to another level of what the problem of a container would be, not containing. Then the exterior of number 46 La Trobe Street is recast. The interior is made an accomplice to its strategy. Pressed against the other, the new container for the office of Edmund and Corrigan does not assume the shape of what may leak out. The container refuses to conform, so the interior is forced to yield, enclosed by a facade that is an imperfect fit. Historical issues and personal experience were used to generate answers seeking the meaning behind architecture. A parliament building was designed to reflect the sarcastic facts in political events hidden by the government. It is a factory, a production line hidden behind the surface of a parliament building that is built to support a lie and fake democracy. The storyline built up the context, and the architecture must cope. Specific typologies were studied in order to experiment how architecture would serve in the context of surrealism. It tests out how architecture works as a system. Childhood memory of the outdoor market spreading out on the street like a broken glass of jam, and the criticizing of the memory of getting lost in my own neighborhood since everything looks the same, inspired the design of the market, where architecture becomes a support of interaction and communication between people. It becomes a denial towards the user-specific project, but also could be seen as the extreme of user-specific, where I set myself as the user in the narrative. User-specific projects answer the question of who architecture is for. Research of the site is done to study the group we need to be designing for. It shows the other side of how to use stereotypes, but then it is criticized by the belief that architecture works when it is personal, as we could not define other people. A better representation is shown by the design of a cemetery that becomes a memorial, which serves the living more than the dead. Inspired by the anecdote of me seeing an old man having lunch alone at the park. The living are the ones left to continue experiencing, and cemeteries are standardized based on what the living thought their loved ones deserve. Finally, questions started with how explore methods and design approaches. I say a tree, then I draw a tree. Drawings have evidenced the design in the writing as a subtool. In Studio Spencer to Spring, objects collected as fragments of reality formed a fictional condition for architecture to work within. However, it becomes a weakness for the design, as there is no restriction at all to evaluate and reflect. When writing is working as narrative and representation of the outcome, it does not talk about the architecture moves anymore, but its influence, the artifact. That is when the writing becomes a reflection of the drawing and the architecture design. Writings do not work efficiently when it comes to a bigger scale, such as master planning and planning typology, tracing out circulation and analyzing relationships between space. To define the problem of rearrangement of space, drawings and visualization work better than the writings. For example, work to be redesigned and coloration. Ideas like layers in architecture in terms of typology start to merge throughout the design experience, how one is embedded into the other, a cemetery working as a memorial, a market with architectural language of an art gallery and the neighborhood, a factory hidden behind a parliament building, a container inserted into the heritage of an office. It is also concluded that via the practice of portfolio as self-reflection, architecture is personal. It is a result of what the architect believes that architecture could give. After the experience of all this design practice, I decided to move on to a new journey of digital and parametric design, testing out the relatively new aesthetics created with new technology and techniques, and its relationship with architecture. That is when writing could only support the research on technology for me. Writing becomes dull, describing beauty of the form, shifting of scale, and balance between repetition. New printing techniques and connection methods were also explored in the studio. However, during the experience, I am consistently drawn towards studios that require more narrative, readings, and theory, which would be taken into account in my future direction of study. Thank you.